I'm the Reverend Christine Dance, and it is my great honor to serve as the minister of this congregation. Sometimes you realize that you've had everything wrong. Like when I was younger, when Bob Dylan sang Purple Haze, he was saying, "Excuse me while I kiss this guy." He was kissing the sky. I didn't learn that until many, many years. Or I just found out that I've been calling the woman I work out with at the gym the wrong name. I see her 3 times a week. I've been calling her Marilyn. Her name is Marianne. She didn't correct me, by the way, all of this time. I feel like that when I think of the nativity story. I think I got it all wrong. Now, many of you know that I got the incredible opportunity to go to the Holy Land last month. It was absolutely amazing to see the place where all of the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all have their origin stories. It was amazing to see the places that we've heard about in stories and seen in paintings or imagined in our minds. And it doesn't matter whether you believe Jesus was real or the Son of God or just a metaphor. Either way, we know that this story is based in Bethlehem in the 1st century. And that place, the place of Bethlehem, has become so integrally part of a cultural landscape. Now, in my mind, Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, looked like this. Looks familiar? Any of you had that? You kind of walk across the desert, there's camels, to some sort of stable in the middle of nowhere, right? Or maybe Bethlehem looked like this? I don't know, that gets a kind of a city? And the nativity, it definitely looked something like this, right? A stable out in the middle of the desert. Or this, a really fancy stable with arched windows. So imagine my surprise when I got there and I headed to the area around the city of David. Now, this is where Joseph needed to go and bring Mary for the census. Now, why did Joseph drag his betrothed all the way from Nazareth to Bethlehem in her last stages of pregnancy just for a census? Well, the Bible made it clear that it was Rome's first census. Other than it being a royal decree, if Joseph was a landowner and did not register that at the census, it's possible he could have lost his land. So off they went. Now, the city of David is right outside the walled city of Jerusalem, and Bethlehem is just a few miles from that. And it looks kind of like this. It's not kind of like this. This is what it looks like now. It is mountainous, and it's full of these limestone bluffs surrounded by dirt. It's dotted with green scrub, and it's got a whole bunch of olive trees. Truth be told, it looks a lot like Phoenix. Now, the limestone hills have these little caves and nooks all throughout them, where the water has carved away the limestone. We see them everywhere, even now in modern times. Some are small enough to fit one person crouched in, and some are big enough to hold a whole family. I had it wrong. Also, I learned that we've all been looking at this story through our modern lens of architecture with houses and built stables. But in the 1st century Judea, many homes were caves. And if not, they were rudimentary structures made out of the limestone that they took from the mountains. And in the dwellings where there was a structure, the animals were often kept in caves because that was where they could be kept out of the elements, like the rain and the cold. This is making sense, right? It's pretty logical. And often those spaces doubled as guest rooms. Now, why would you put your guests in with the animals? It was warm. That's where it was warm. Many of the stable caves were in 2 layers. The animals were in one part, down below, and then there was a ledge for sleeping, often just above the animals, because heat rises, feces falls. You all getting the picture here? It's actually being in the cave was one of the more desirable places to sleep because it had built-in heat. I had it wrong. And there was another thing that our guides discussed. Now, Joseph came from Nazareth. It took us 2 hours by bus. It's about 100 miles, if you're wondering. He came from Nazareth to the city of David to register for the census. He went to the city of David because he was from the house of David. Now, David, that was King David of the Hebrew Bible, right? The famed king of all of the land. Now, if Joseph was a descendant of David's, and indeed it seemed that he was his great-grandson, he would have been given special treatment. He was the great-grandchild of royalty. He was a descendant of the Holy of Holiest. He actually had to be that because that is what the Hebrew Bible foretold. The Savior had to be born into a royal family to be a king. So Joseph wasn't just any dude, right? Joseph would have been treated like royalty when he walked into the city of David. They would have given him the best room they had. It's a little different than the story that John told us, but things change over the centuries. The word inn has often been mistranslated. It's not like they had Motel 6s on every corner in the first century Judea. No, inn, properly translated, meant the guest room above the animals, where it was warm with soft hay. I had it wrong. So the nativity scene probably looked more like this. No, that's still way too big. Probably more like this. But more inside. Let's admit it, cramped spaces inside caves probably don't make the most inspirational paintings. Reality is rarely as pretty as the pictures. And here's the final thing. I didn't know about the distance between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. And I didn't know that Bethlehem is in what is now the West Bank of Palestine. And truth be told, if the couple were looking for an inn now, this is more what they'd find. They wouldn't be able to get to Bethlehem because of the occupational wall. And they wouldn't be able to get there without going through a checkpoint with guards armed with automatic rifles. I had it wrong. For me, the magic of Christmas is not the literal truth of the biblical story or necessarily the birth of the Savior. The magic of Christmas for me is how we find ourselves in the story today and how peeling away the layers of the story each and every year give us more insight into our own lives. I feel like this is something that is awesome about being a Unitarian Universalist. We are always open to new revelation, about new ways of opening up our spiritual lives and new ways that our minds and our hearts can open and expand. For me, it's also a humbling way to look at a situation, usually through a justice lens. It is recognizing that at any given time, I usually only have about that much of the story, and there is awe and excitement for me in discovering the rest of the story. It is recognizing that we can see people one way and they can be a totally different way if only we were curious enough to find out. It is understanding privilege and sometimes how it's seen, that you have to be open to understanding and knowing people's stories to understand. And it is recognizing that hospitality comes in all different forms, but that it is always a way to show the best sides of ourselves. And by welcoming others in, we open ourselves up to miracles and connection. May we always be open to new information, new ways of seeing the world, and acknowledging that sometimes, just possibly, we might have it wrong. And may the miracles of discovery and hospitality and generosity and peace and awe be with you tonight and every night. May it be so.